I handed my routing system to the CEO in a quiet boardroom, expecting questions, maybe curiosity, but he laughed. Said it was cute, told me enterprise decisions weren't built by support staff, and slid the folder back like it was a joke. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just nodded and walked out. 3 months later, shipping delays crippled the company, clients walked, regulators circled, and the board demanded to know why no one had seen it coming. That's when they realized the system he laughed at was the only thing keeping his career alive. My name is Lauren Mitchell, and the day I handed my routing system to the CEO, and watched him laugh, it finally became clear how little power titles actually hold when they're built on ignorance, because I had spent 11 years at Northline Logistics quietly designing, maintaining, and refining the routing intelligence that allowed the company to promise impossible delivery windows without collapsing under its own weight, and while executives bragged about growth and innovation on earnings calls, I was the one translating real-world chaos into logic that worked, the one who understood how weather disruptions, fuel constraints, labor shortages, and regulatory limits intersected at a level most people didn't even know existed. I wasn't loud about it, mostly because I didn't need to be, results spoke for themselves, and for years that was enough, until the company hired a new CEO named Grant Holloway, a former consultant with a perfect smile, expensive suits, and a dangerous belief that confidence could replace comprehension. Grant loved big gestures, reorgs, slogans, town halls filled with buzzwords, and within weeks he started questioning why certain systems weren't productized or simplified, which was executive code for stripping out the nuance that actually made them work. That's when I decided to do something I'd never done before: document everything. I spent nights and weekends building a comprehensive routing architecture overview, complete with failure scenarios, predictive models, and a roadmap for scaling safely, not because I wanted praise, but because I could see where this was heading. And when I finally got 15 minutes on Grant's calendar, I walked into the boardroom with a printed binder and a quiet sense of responsibility. He skimmed the cover, chuckled, and said, "This is impressive, Lauren, but you're thinking too small. We don't need homemade systems, we need vision." And when I tried to explain that the homemade system was the reason their largest healthcare and defense clients hadn't missed contractual SLAs in years, he waved it off, joked about engineers over engineering, and pushed the binder back across the table like it was a child's science project. I felt something shift in my chest, not anger, not embarrassment, just clarity, and I thanked him for his time, picked up my binder, and walked out knowing I had done my part. From that moment on, I stopped preventing problems no one acknowledged. I still did my job, still followed policy, but I stopped quietly compensating for bad decisions made above me, stopped manually correcting edge cases that were being deliberately ignored, stopped shielding leadership from the natural consequences of their shortcuts. 3 months later, Northline expanded aggressively into new regions without adjusting routing tolerances, exactly as I'd warned, and the cracks appeared almost immediately: missed deliveries, cascading delays, penalties triggered automatically by contracts no one had bothered to reread, and when operations teams escalated concerns, they were told to trust the system, not realizing the system they were trusting had been stripped of its safeguards. Clients noticed. Big ones. A national medical supplier flagged repeated failures and requested an audit, followed by a defense contractor invoking breach clauses that triggered regulatory scrutiny, and suddenly the board was asking questions Grant couldn't answer because he had never understood what he'd dismissed. Engineers scrambled, consultants were brought in, and millions were spent trying to reverse engineer a system that no longer existed in its original form. Because the routing intelligence wasn't just code, it was institutional memory encoded through years of lived experience, and I was the only one who knew how it all fit together. When my phone finally rang, it wasn't Grant, it was the board's outside counsel asking if I would be willing to explain the architecture I'd previously presented, and I agreed, but only under a consulting agreement that reflected the value of what I was about to restore. Sitting in that same boardroom weeks later, I walked them through the binder Grant had laughed at, page by page, explaining exactly how each ignored safeguard mapped to a real-world failure they were now experiencing, and as understanding spread across their faces, silence settled over the room in a way I'll never forget. Someone asked if Grant had seen this, and I answered truthfully that he had, and that he'd laughed. The meeting ended early. 2 days later, Grant Holloway resigned by mutual agreement, a phrase that hides consequences behind politeness, and Northline announced a strategic pause on expansion while quietly rehiring expertise it had once dismissed. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I finished my consulting work, trained a team properly, and moved on, because this was never about revenge, it was about respect, and about what happens when leadership confuses confidence for competence and dismisses the people who actually understand how things work. The system didn't destroy his career. His laughter did.